Welcome to The Catch Up, a podcast from the Daily Catch where we take you inside the news. My name is Walter Mullen, and I'm the publisher of the Daily Catch.
And I'm Emily Sachar, the editor of the Daily Catch.
In this show, we discuss stories that have appeared in the Daily Catch. We give you insights into how we put the stories together, offer additional observations, and discuss where the stories may be heading as we move forward. Emily, today is a very big day for The Catch Up. Do you know why?
Why is that, Walter?
We have our first sponsor for the show.
Oh my gosh. Congrats to you. Congrats to the show. Who is it?
I will tell you about it. Our first sponsor for the catch-up is Hutton Brickyards. So let me tell you about Hutton Brickyards. At Hutton Brickyards, every season brings a new way to dine. Edgewood Restaurant and Bar opens for the season October 30th, offering refined fall and winter dining inside the beautifully restored Edgewood Mansion and a delicious Sunday brunch that's not to be missed. For hours, menus, and reservations, visit huttonbrickyards.com. Edgewood Restaurant and Bar, part of the Hutton Brickyards experience, is at 132 Lindsley Avenue in Kingston. We are very happy to have them as our first sponsor for the show.
We sure are. That's wonderful news.
Okay, Emily, it's time to catch up.
Let's do it, Walter. We got a lot on the agenda today.
So 1 week from today is Election Day, and we're going to be talking today about 2 or 3 different stories which our readers and voters are confronting. The first story is the race for a county judge.
Yes, so we're going to cover 3 different races. We may even have time for a 4th. We'll see how fast I speak. But before we actually talk about those races, the first 2 we're going to talk about are county races. I thought it might be helpful to just give a little background on why these races feel so contested. So, Walter, as you know, this is our first major election since Donald Trump came back into office in January. So one of the things that may be on the ballot indirectly is how he is affecting politics and how he is affecting our local politics. Even though we have no national races here and no huge races, like we're not electing a mayor the way we have in New York City, there still is a lot of excitement around this. And typically in presidential years, Walter, Democratic turnout in Dutchess County is around 70%. But in recent off-year local elections, which is what this is, it's an off-year election, that typically drops to below 45%, according to the Dutchess County Board of Elections. So Dutchess is a purple county. We have about 230,000 registered voters in the county, of which 38% are Democrats and 28% are Republicans, but that leaves fully 29% that are members of neither party. We call them no party candidates. So depending on how the turnout goes, Walter, that could really affect whether Democrats or Republicans are successful in this election.
So just to recap, we're watching to see if the Trump administration is going to have a bump effect in our local off-year election.
Yes, exactly. Whether it drives more Democrats who are frustrated to the polls in this county, or whether we continue to see the traditional pattern of low turnout by Democrats.
Or it could drive more Republicans to the polls.
That's what I'm saying. Exactly. It could drive more Republicans. But the real key is, does it drive? Republican turnout tends to be much more consistent off year versus on year. It's the Democratic turnout that tends to be so waffly. So we'll be looking very closely to see that. Now, what we've heard anecdotally is that voter turnout is high for early voting, which started on Saturday. Early voting runs through next Sunday. Then we have a break for a day, and then we have a full-on election day on Tuesday. So we'll be watching that very closely.
Great. So let's start with the judge race. Can you give us the background on this race, Emily?
Yeah, so interesting, in Dutchess County, we have 2 slots for county judge. And we already have one woman in one of those positions, Jessica Segal. She was elected about 5 years ago, so she has about 5 more years to serve because the terms are for 10 years. We have now the incumbent, Ned McLoughlin, a Republican who was first elected in 2016, defending his seat. If his challenger wins, we will, for the first time in Dutchess County, have two women in the seats of county judge. Gary is the criminal unit bureau chief at the Dutchess County Public Defender's Office, but she has also been, as Ned McLoughlin was, a prosecutor, so they both have that background. Now, he had been in front, way in front on fundraising, but in the last few months, she has closed the gap. So she's raised about 139,000 versus 195,000 based on the data I checked 2 days ago for McLoughlin.
This may be kind of a simple question, but I believe some listeners might be asking it. What exactly do these judges do?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Walter. So, a Dutchess County Court judge adjudicates all kinds of cases, cases involving felonies and misdemeanors, as well as certain civil matters. So you sue me, the Daily Catch gets sued, etc., for up to $25,000. So civil and criminal cases. They preside over trials, they make decisions on legal matters, they have the authority to set sentences, they also issue pistol permits, they oversee cases involving issues like addiction and mental illness, and they're really crucial in ensuring that the criminal justice system operates fairly and equally under the law. Big responsibility.
That's really helpful. So, what are the issues in this race this year?
Yeah, so there are the sort of obvious issues that we hear that the candidates talking about, and then there are some less obvious issues. So Gary is promising fairness and community trust, which is sort of an obvious thing for a judge candidate to promise. But there's also a women's rights angle to her campaign. And I don't know if, Walter, if you've seen these signs that have gone up in the last week or so, but there's some new signs I'm seeing on the road that say women need to be safe in Dutchess County, vote McLoughlin out. We'll talk more about why. He, on the other hand, is emphasizing law, order, and public safety, sort of the traditional Republican line. Now, those two things are not directly at odds, but it's the subtleties underneath those arguments that are driving this campaign.
And tell us a bit more about the two candidates, just to give us more about their background and where they came
Yeah,
from.
yeah. So they both went to Pace for law school. As I mentioned, they both have been prosecutors. And interestingly, on this one topic that I've been alluding to without naming it, the Nikki Addimando case, they both have had involvement in that case. So maybe it would be a good time, Walter, tell me what you think, for me to digress for just a minute and talk about the Nikki Addimando case.
Definitely. But just to be clear, this is a case where they were both involved, both candidates were involved in different ways.
That's exactly right. And I'm going to explain how.
Okay.
So Nikki Addimando is a young woman. She's going to be 37 next month. She was a young Poughkeepsie mother who was convicted of killing her domestic partner. His name was Christopher Grover in 2017 when she was 29 years old. She ultimately had two children with him, but they had a history of a sexually and physically abusive relationship when she shot him to death. So she was convicted. But along the way, Kara Gary was Addimando's defense attorney for 8 months until McLoughlin, who was on the bench, ruled that she had to be removed from the case. And this decision was ultimately upheld on appeal. But prosecutors argued that Gary's office had years earlier represented a potential witness for the Addimando case in a DWI case, and they said that created a conflict of interest. So they asked Ned McLoughlin, the judge, to remove Kara Gary from the case. And that witness was never called to testify. So there's been some, innuendo that that whole thing was kind of a setup to just get a competent attorney off the case. After Gary was removed, there was bad blood, as you might imagine, between the judge and this defense attorney.
Just to hit pause for one moment.
Yeah.
So Gary was removed before the case went to trial?
Yes.
Okay.
along the way of the sort of the pretrial stuff. I mean, she was working on the case for 8 months in pretrial motions and so forth. Then she was convicted at trial. And in 2019, Nikki Addimando came up for sentencing. And McLoughlin had a choice at that moment as to how to sentence Nikki Addimando. And the reason he had a choice is that that year, a law had come into place, come into being in New York, the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act. That's a lot to say, a mouthful. And survivors of domestic violence had worked on that law starting in 1985. So for a very, very long time, almost 35 years. And that act allows judges to give reduced sentences to abuse survivors. So when he sentenced Nikki Addimando, I believe it was to 19 years to life in prison, he drew very sharp criticism from domestic violence advocates. And this sentence has surfaced in this race as a point of contrast between the two candidates. So, moreover, after a lengthy appeal, Addimando's sentence was reduced and she was released from prison. She had been housed at Bedford Hills Correctional in 2024. So these issues are swirling around this race, as you might well imagine.
Very interesting. It's interesting how this situation has connected them and put them in opposition.
Yeah, exactly. And
What
they
what
do talk about it. And Ned McLoughlin, I think interestingly on the campaign trail and in interviews has been proactive in his messaging in saying that he supports and steps up for and cares about abuse survivors and women. He's like proactively mentioned those things without mentioning the Addimando case, I think is a clear signal to voters that he wants to be seen as sensitive to women. But when we judge, no pun intended, his actual decisions from the bench, we have to look at it a little bit, or we may choose to look at it differently. So that's up to the voters to decide. But certainly Kara Gary is raising this issue.
So except for this issue, what other key issues have surfaced in the campaign?
Yeah, so there's also been in the last few months ethics issues that have surfaced around this race. So some have argued that McLoughlin is running ads that signal a pro law enforcement bias, and judge candidates are subject to a different sort of set of ethics concerns because they do have to signal in their campaigns that they will be neutral. So, Democratic Dutchess County Committee Chair Michael Dupree has pointed to an early 2025 Facebook ad that featured a New York Post headline that read, "Woke New York City judges are cutting dangerous perps loose in an alarming rate." And it was along a list of so called woke judges. And McLoughlin, on the caption, said, "We can't let woke ideology spread here in Dutchess County. We need judges who will protect our communities and stand for the rule of law." And that was viewed by Dupree, who filed a complaint with the Ethics Committee, that he was somehow putting his finger on decision making in a way that was not neutral. That was not, he was insinuating that there was woke ideology that we needed to tamp down. Meanwhile, Kara Gary has been accused of violating judicial campaign rules by appearing in partisan campaign advertising and events. So, in a complaint filed a few weeks ago with the New York State Board of Elections Enforcement Division and the Commission on Judicial Ethics, Michael McCormick, who's chair of the Dutchess County Republican Committee, outlined those concerns relative to Kara Gary. Now, she maintains that she's followed the judge's ethics manual to a T. And by the time these things are actually ruled upon, we will already have a winner in the race. But it's created an undercurrent of stress in the race. So that's kind of that race in a nutshell. And
Speaking of a
incumbent,
winner,
yeah. Mhm.
speaking of a winner in the race, is there any polling to indicate who may be ahead?
Not that I'm aware of. It's very difficult to poll in this county. It's expensive to do so. So I'm not aware of any polling that has been done in this race.
It's an interesting race.
One other small thing that I just thought maybe our listeners would find interesting is Kara Gary's campaign manager is John Rossi, who's a Rhinebeck resident. So the race has some interesting local implications for other reasons as well.
Okay, so now let's move on to the comptroller's race. So again, I'm going to ask a simple question, but I think a lot of people wondering this. What does a comptroller do?
Well, it would be helpful if the candidates themselves agreed on what the comptroller does. But in this race, the candidates themselves don't even agree. So Dan Aymar-Blair is the Democratic incumbent. And in his view, the comptroller serves as an independent watchdog responsible for scrutinizing budgets and contracts and capital projects. His opponent, Will Truitt, the Republican, just 30 years old, says that the comptroller is akin to a chief financial officer, someone who should work in step with the county executive and the county legislature, keeping the government one united team. So while Dan Aymar-Blair sees the comptroller as a check on government, Will Truitt sees the comptroller as working in line with and in tandem with county government. So the two of them have a very different view on that role. Aymar-Blair feels that Truitt just doesn't understand the job, and Truitt thinks that Aymar-Blair is creating conflict unnecessarily.
Again, simple question, but is there not a job description for this that explains what the job is supposed to be?
Well, there is, Walter. Is there a description for being president of the United States? There's different ways to interpret this job, different ways to do this
Yeah,
job,
good point.
and different ways to leverage the resources that are assigned to the office.
So back to why we're having this race. Didn't Amar Blair just win a contest for this office?
Yeah, as I mentioned, he's only been in office for 1 year. And he won by less than 1,000 votes. I don't know if you remember the race, but he won by just 1,000 votes. And he was filling out the unexpired term of a woman named Robin Lois. I actually remember Robin Lois's ads as I used to drive down to the Poughkeepsie train station. She had very big ads, big billboard ads. After she won, she left the county to take a job in Albany. So we had a short election or a short cycle to fill that role. And another thing that makes this a very interesting time in county politics, and in this race in particular, is that Republicans have held the county executive role since 1991. And since 2009, Republicans have controlled the legislature. And this job is sometimes seen as a check on those two roles. You'll often hear that Americans want a divided executive legislative branch at the national level. If we have a Republican president, they want a Democratic Congress. We don't have that right now, but that is sometimes how, or Wall Street, what you'll sometimes hear, wants a divided government. There is some thinking here that Dutchess County, since we have a Republican controlled legislature so far for now, and we have a Republican executive, they might like to see a Democrat in the comptroller's role since it is a checks kind of role. So we'll have to see what voters come out with.
So let's drill down a bit more, Emily, and tell us some more about each candidate.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, Will Truitt is just 30 years old. I mean, he looks like a young man, a political animal. He's a lifelong resident of Hyde Park, graduate of what is now Marist University, has a BA in finance, and he's been a financial manager and head of compliance with a local construction company. And I should mention that he's the chair of the Dutchess County Legislature. He's a District 7 legislator. So that contrasts to an extent with Dan Aymar-Blair, who's 49 years old, fully 50% older. And he was for 15 years on the Beacon City Council. He lives in Beacon with his wife and two sons. He spent 15 years managing budgets for the New York City Department of Education. So he's an accountant, looks like an accountant, talks like an accountant, is an accountant. not a natural politician. He grew up in Saratoga Springs. His dad was a Hudson River tugboat captain, and his mom was a geriatric nurse. And he attended George Washington University. So, two very different kinds of candidates for this election.
So let's talk a bit more about the issues. What are the big issues that they're debating back and forth?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one too, actually, because when you judge or look at what they're talking about on the stump, so Truitt is invoking traditional, or what we now think of as almost traditional MAGA values, and really appealing to the Trump base. So at a recent rally, for example, he talked about the brainwashing of the young in academic institutions, and he warned of growing Christian religious persecution across the country, talked about being a Christian himself, and the crowd paused for a moment of silence for right-wing activist Charlie Kirk, who had been assassinated just a few days before this rally I'm alluding to. And Truitt vowed to uphold Kirk's legacy. So this is at a rally for Dutchess County Comptroller. It was a very interesting moment. And Dutchess GOP Vice Chair Doug McCool really whipped up the crowd. He yelled, Truitt, 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 Truitt will do it. And that was a very interesting moment in this race. So it wasn't about what kind of audits he'll do or what topics or things he's interested in auditing or supervising. It was really playing to a national political feeling. Aymar-Blair, on the other hand, has noted that readership of his reports, which have included everything from a study of the Youth Opportunity Union on a stalled community center project to a report on the jail commissary inmate accounts to a report on how the American Rescue Plan money in Dutchess County was spent, 57 million in federal COVID aid. So he's done a lot of reports in his 1 year in office, and he's done something kind of fascinating with them. He's reported on them in social media by doing little social media reels, little Instagram reels and Facebook reels and so forth, to try to drum up interest, especially among young people, in the work of his office. So his approach to the race has been more studious than Truitt's, which has been a more emotional appeal. So I think that's a really interesting point. Truitt says that if elected, one of his first priorities will be to meet with county department heads to review their 2026 budgets, just like a chief financial officer would. He said in one interview, we want to make sure that they have the funds necessary to get the job done. And I want to be there to sit and hear from them one-on-one to hear what their concerns are for their departments, and then I can do an analysis. And Aymar-Blair, in response to that, called that a very strange vision for the office. You can read the charter. He said, this is not a chief financial officer position. This is the chief auditing officer and the chief accounting officer, to your question, Walter. And we have a budget director and we have a director of finance. We don't need a third person in the mix. I am in the oversight role as comptroller, and that is the entirety of this position, oversight. So voters, again, will decide, what do they want in this role?
Just one quick question for you, Emily. Do you think the average voter really understands how the comptroller position cascades down to their everyday life?
I do not think they do. No.
Could we possibly try to maybe give an example of how it does?
Well, so let's take the American Rescue Plan money as an example. So that money has been assigned in many ways to projects down to the local level. So the money came into the county, and Sue Serino has apportioned some of it out to local governments to then in turn assign to different projects. So knowing how that money has been spent, where it has been spent, is an interesting question for the comptroller to answer. What you might infer is that, well, Truitt would not be interested in looking necessarily at how that money went to Democrats versus Republicans, but would instead want to make sure that the county received the money as it was supposed to and that it was spent on something, right? But maybe not do that close parsing of Democrat versus Republican. So I'm just throwing out hypotheticals, right? That's not necessarily a prominent example. But do we care about how the commissary accounts are run at the Dutchess County Jail? Maybe we do. Maybe there are voters who are concerned about that because these are Dutchess County monies, Dutchess County expenditures. So, yeah, and certainly if there were a case of malfeasance going on at the Dutchess County government level, we would want somebody to be the watchdog for that, argues Dan Aymar-Blair.
So before we wrap up on this race, there's one other area we should talk about. The Democrats have called out Truitt for a compensation package.
Yeah, so the Dutchess County Legislature in 2024 escalated salaries. So for example, the county executive salary rose from 157,000 to 185,000. The county clerk's salary went up from 119,000 to 150,000. And the role of Dutchess County Legislator chair went itself. That's Truitt's job from 35,000 to $54,500. Now, Truitt, who pushed for these increases, defends them, arguing that legislative pay had been stagnant for decades and that nobody should be deterred from running for office because they can't afford to do the job. But some have criticized the legislature for voting in these packages, these kinds of pay packages.
Okay, so let's digest all this. So we've covered the judge race. We've now covered the comptroller race. And then something happened over the weekend in Rhinebeck that was very interesting. Shall we move over to what happened this weekend in Rhinebeck?
Yes, but I have to tell our listeners it wasn't something at Amtrak. So, Walter, thank you for being willing to talk about this. No, with all seriousness, a very interesting development. I'll just backtrack for a second, Walter, and tell you that we had a staff meeting last week and we were planning our election coverage for the night of the election. And I said to everybody, well, one thing we don't have to worry about is Rhinebeck. There's no candidates running against opposition. Everything is unopposed. Elizabeth Spinzia is running unopposed for a supervisor of the town. There are two town board seats up for election. Those two seats are running unopposed. The highway superintendent in Rhinebeck is running unopposed. What could possibly happen? Well, citizens of Rhinebeck awoke on Sunday morning to signs in their neighborhoods, flyers taped to the trees and to the electric poles, and in the village, suggesting a write-in. And that would be, they suggested writing in Gary Bassett's name, a Democrat, not a Republican, a Democrat, to unseat Elizabeth Spinzia. Now, this was unheard of. We've never heard of something like this happening in Rhinebeck. We have had races with write-in candidates. In fact, just a year ago, the Rhinebeck Democratic Committee organized a write-in for Dana Peterson for town board because Erin Kokeben, who was on the ballot, was a sort of a phantom candidate. She had dropped out after the time to put a name on the ballot. So in order to ensure that the candidate who the Democratic Committee was supporting got elected, they ran a write-in campaign. And they started about 2 months before the actual election, telling people how to vote, who to vote for, how to write the name in, putting out flyers and postcards. This is something altogether different. So wake up to signs all over. And I woke up to lots and lots of text messages. What is going on, Daily Catch? We need you, which was, of course,
So,
gratifying in its own way.
so let's talk a little bit about what we think might have been the motivation behind this stealth campaign. Whoever put the signs up, and we don't know who put them up, but what might have been the motivation?
Yeah. So, from what we can discern, there are several issues that have been causing a bit of a breakdown between Elizabeth Spinzia as supervisor and some other leaders in Rhinebeck. So, as I think you and our listeners will know, there's been a lot of discussion about the Six Senses hospitality project down on Route 9G that is not in Rhinebeck, but in which the Rhinebeck town government has gotten involved by suing to block the project. So that has gotten a number of people, including the Rhinebeck Chamber, up in arms a bit, very concerned. And there are others who are frustrated by that move. But Elizabeth Spinzia and the town board, who passed the resolution to allow for this lawsuit to proceed, feel that this project is not in the best interest of Rhinebeck, that it will create a lot of traffic, and so forth. So that's one point of contention. There also has been a proposal from the town for a bed tax, a small amount of money that's been proposed, but a lot in the eyes of the Rhinebeck Chamber to be levied on overnight hotel stays. It's called a bed tax. And again, some of the same people who oppose the action that the town has taken on Six Senses also oppose this idea of a bed tax. So there's
And
been
just
frustration at the town supervisor for leading the way on some of these issues.
people who are opposed to the bed tax, Emily, what is their reason for opposing it?
So they're afraid that it will suppress demand for restaurant and hotel stays. They feel that people who are coming into Rhinebeck don't want to pay any more than they absolutely need to. And they argue that that is something that, since most of these businesses are in the village, that the town is out of line in levying this or proposing to levy this kind of bed tax. There's also a new issue, Walter, that has been swirling around. We actually have not written about this because it's so fresh, but it surfaced yesterday when our reporter, Eloise Goldsmith, was interviewing various people, that some are frustrated or concerned about the manner by which the Linwood property is being managed for sale.
Now, let's
So
tell listeners clearly what is the Linwood property.
yes. So Linwood is one of the last great properties coming up for sale now on the Hudson River. And it's been in the hands of a group of nuns, the Linwood Sisters, as we sometimes call them. And they are coming up now for a decision, have decided to sell the property. So Elizabeth Spinzia has outlined an exciting plan for that project in the eyes of many to turn the property into some kind of combination public park and hospitality space. And the person who had raised some objections to this with us yesterday said that he is concerned about the optics of the situation and thinks that Elizabeth Spinzia, who holds a real estate license, somehow wants to get her hand on that commission personally. Now, she has adamantly denied this just yesterday, said that's just hogwash, that she has only the interests of the town at heart. But this is a new issue that is surfacing around Elizabeth Spinzia and her leadership. So it's very emotional, Walter, very, very emotional. And just last night, we haven't reported on this yet, but some new letters were flying from Luciano Valdivia, who's the chair or president, I should say, of the Rhinebeck Area Chamber of Commerce, and then a quick retort and response from Elizabeth Spinzia. So we will be covering that as well.
So we're 1 week out from the election. Do we think this stealth write-in effort will have any traction or gain any momentum between now and next week?
Well, we will see. The signs were all taken down. Many of them, I shouldn't say all, but we see many of them are gone. Michael Slaby, the chair of the Red Hook Democratic Committee, asserted that the committee supports the candidates it has listed on the ballot, not write-in candidates. And that was not a diss, he said, to Gary Bassett, who's, by the way, also a Democrat and also a member of the Red Hook Democratic Committee. But Michael Slaby is about the process and wants to ensure that the process is followed. Now, will there be names written in? I'm sure there will be. We've heard from poll watchers at Brookmead, which is one of the early voting locations for Dutchess County and the only one in Rhinebeck. The only one, by the way, also that Red Hook voters can go to that's nearby, that people have turned up at the polls and asked how they can write in a candidate. Where on the ballot do they do that? So there certainly seem to be people who are interested in doing this. But Hannah Black, the former Dutchess County Board of Elections Democratic Commissioner, told us that such efforts are virtually never successful unless they are, as we just discussed, highly organized. People don't turn over their ballot and write in a candidate. So we don't expect that Elizabeth Spinzia will be defeated at the polls, but we did ask Gary Bassett, would he be willing to serve if he wins? And he didn't say he wouldn't be. So his name and his picture are invoked on the flyers. He says that he is not participating in this, but he is certainly aware of it while on vacation in North Carolina. So we'll see.
So, if our listeners are not too exhausted at this point, shall we close by talking briefly about the Red Hook Town Board race?
Why not, Walter? That's actually kind of an interesting moment. So, you may recall that in Red Hook, we had to redo, I live in Red Hook, that's why I say we, the town, the Democratic Committee redid its Democratic caucus, and the candidates were the same candidates were elected to represent the Democratic Party. So we have Christina Ducharme running with Kenny Migliarelli opposite one Republican candidate. So there are two seats up for grabs on the Red Hook Town Board, and they are running against Mr. Mergendahl. So the Republicans did not put up two candidates. Moreover, Christina Ducharme and Ken Migliarelli are also listed on a new independent line called Homegrown Red Hook. So their names will appear twice on the ballot. And Mr. Mergendahl's name, I believe, will also appear twice. I'm not positive if he's listed on the conservative line or not, but he's listed on the Republican line. So we will see. In Red Hook, Democrats represent 48% of the electorate. The GOP holds 21%, and independents hold 26%. Ken Migliarelli has been in the past an independent, so he is expected to gather a strong amount of that independent vote, as well as some of the GOP vote himself. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the vote splits, but I think it would be very unexpected if Ducharme and Ken Migliarelli don't pull that race clearly to victory.
So, as usual, we encourage all our listeners to get out and vote. And let's just remind people before we close, Emily, of how they can vote between now and next Tuesday.
Yeah, and actually how they can vote next Tuesday too, because there's a change this year in how they can vote. So we have early voting, as I mentioned, taking place right now from now through Sunday. And by and large, the hours are 9 to 5, but people should check our story, which is under the Election 2025 tab under Government on our page. We have had a story there that has a listing of all the polling locations in Dutchess County and the hours. If they want to stay close to home, the local early voting location is at Brookmead in Rhinebeck. Now, next week, something different is happening in both Red Hook and Rhinebeck, indeed in every county, I should say in every township in Dutchess County, and that is you can vote at any polling place in your town. So in Rhinebeck, there are 2 voting locations on Tuesday. In Red Hook, there are 4. You don't have to go to your so-called, local polling spot. And this is a first time that we've had that going on. It's true in every town in the county. Did that answer your
Okay, well,
question, Walter?
it did. And I'm now officially exhausted by all this. It's exciting, but it's also complex.
Yes, it is complex, but it is also a very exciting series of races. And as you said, go out and vote. We've covered all of these races, Walter, in the Daily Catch. So if you want to learn more, you want to get more facts, you want to get yourself truly educated, go to the Daily Catch. That is a public service that we're very, very, very proud, Walter, to provide.
And on election night, obviously, we'll be providing the coverage of results.
We will be covering coverage because there will be no World Series. Last night I stayed up till 3:03 in the morning watching the World Series, Walter.
So I was going to close our show with a kind of a crazy question. Why do you look so tired this morning, Emily?
I'm exhausted, Walter, because the game went till 18 innings. And I don't even normally watch the World Series, but I'm very interested in this race right now between this challenge, this contest between an American team and a Canadian team during these tariff discussions with our president. So I've been kind of curious, and I wanted to see the now infamous, I suppose, Ronald Reagan ad where he talks about the dangers of tariffs. I wanted to see that aired on national airtime. So actually it wasn't aired last night, but it has been during the World Series. So I stayed up. I kept saying I'm going to call it a night. I'm going to call it a night because I need to be fresh for Walter for taping the catch up, but I didn't pull back.
Well, we got through it. So this concludes our episode of The Catch Up. We hope you enjoyed listening. If you like our broadcast, please be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite platform, and you'll be notified every time we drop a new show. Big thank you to Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud at Radio Free Rhinecilff for their help producing today's episode. And a thank you to Esther Martell for her help with editing. And finally, a very special thanks to our new sponsor, Edgewood Restaurant and Bar at Hutton Brickyards, where every season brings a new way to dine in the Hudson. Edgewood opens October 30th, this Thursday. For menus and reservations, visit huttonbrickyards.com. Emily, it's always a pleasure catching up with you.
Thanks for really digging in with these important races, Walter.